All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're looking at what happens when ancient spiritual philosophy collides head-on with modern secular law. We're going to objectively break down a really fascinating legal defense document regarding the Lifechanyuan community and the pretty serious charges brought against it. We'll be examining exactly how the author intricately dismantles the prosecution's indictment piece by piece using factual, legal, and logical counterarguments. It's a highly compelling look at where the boundaries of belief and the legal system intersect. So, let's get into it.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the core dispute, explore the intense debates over communal property and these mysterious things called F-coins, look at the ticket to heaven allegations, detail the overarching rebuttal of fraud, and finally, unpack the broader conflict between philosophy and secular law.
First up, Section 1, Case Background in the Core Dispute.
Which brings us right into Section 2, Communal Property versus Forced Deprivation.
So let's look at the foundational claim against Lifechanyuan. The entire case basically rests on an indictment accusing the community and its founder, who is known as the Guide, of systematically defrauding members of their wealth. On one side, the prosecution alleges forced deprivation. They're saying members are mandated to strip themselves of their private assets. But the defense counters that participation and asset sharing are entirely voluntary. They frame it not as a forced forfeiture at all, but as a legal communal living arrangement that individuals just opt into of their own free will.
To really wrap our heads around the defense's argument here, we have to look at their core economic model. It's called the system of nothingness. The philosophy is defined as having nothing but owning everything. It's a fascinating paradox, right? According to the defense, individuals voluntarily surrender private ownership so that absolutely everything can be shared communally. The author points out that under civil law, adults have the fundamental right to dispose of their property however they want, including voluntary gifting. Therefore, they argue, this is an exercise of constitutional rights to collective living, not some illegal mandate.
And to back up this claim of voluntariness, the author relies heavily on public writings from the Guide. Listen to this quote. Anyone's dedication to the homeland is completely based on self-awareness and voluntariness. No one has the right to force dedication. By pulling texts from as far back as 2012 and as recently as 2023, the defense is attempting to historically prove that participation was always publicly stated as an optional, free choice, explicitly telling people who just didn't want to share property to simply not join the community.
Which raises a pretty fascinating logical question, doesn't it? If a group of adults voluntarily sharing property is deemed illegal, well, are monks who take vows of poverty committing crimes? Is the globally recognized Israeli kibbutz, the famous communal farming model, is that a criminal enterprise? The author uses this comparative logic to ask why these mainstream communal models are celebrated, while Lifechanyuan faces criminal charges for a remarkably similar structure.
Moving along to Section 3, F-coins, currency, or spiritual points.
Now, the prosecution's indictment claims the community issues these F-coins as an actual currency meant to be deposited in a so-called heavenly bank. The defense, however, explicitly rebutes the financial nature of these coins. They argue it is a severe distortion of the facts to label F-coins as a tradable currency, maintaining instead that they are purely a non-financial virtual metric used strictly to record a member's spiritual and moral contributions. By their own rules, an F-coin is just a virtual record of spiritual wealth. Think of it less like a bank account and, honestly, more like video game achievements or Reddit karma. It holds absolutely zero monetary value. The defense tax emphasized that F-coins cannot be printed by a machine, they cannot be traded in any commercial market anywhere, and they definitely cannot be used to purchase goods. Because they never actually enter commercial circulation, they're completely immune to real-world inflation or theft. And get this. Listen to how these are actually earned. Spreading ideas, that gets you 1 F-coin. Volunteering for a day gets you 1 to 2. But rescuing someone from the brink of death, that earns a massive 100 F-coins. So a person could theoretically donate absolutely zero money to the community, but still accumulate huge amounts of F-coins purely through their labor, charity, and good deeds.
So the defense asked a really potent question here. If tracking someone's personal moral contributions is the legal equivalent of issuing currency, then are we going to start criminalizing high school volunteer hours or corporate reward points? The defense argues that criminalizing a spiritual incentive system is just a fundamental misapplication of financial law.
All right, Section 4, Ticket Allegations and Heaven.
The prosecution is asserting that followers are deceptively promised entry to heaven, but only if they donate all their assets and strictly follow the Guide, who is identified in the case by his secular name, Zhang Zifan. The defense pushes back hard, arguing that the prosecution has fundamentally misunderstood the theology of the community.
They state that the philosophy teaches that reaching heaven is the natural, organic result of achieving spiritual perfection. It is absolutely not a transactional financial purchase where your money just equals salvation.
The defense also firmly rejects the claim that the guide acts as some personal, exclusive gatekeeper to the afterlife. They present this quote from 2022. The guide is only the navigator of life and living. This clarification is vital for them. It aims to prove he acts merely as a map reader pointing a direction, completely rejecting the prosecution's narrative that he demands followers worship his secular persona to achieve salvation.
According to the community's own texts, F-coins are just one piece of a much larger puzzle. There are actually 4 strict criteria to reach heaven. You must end worldly ties, have absolutely no debts, accumulate F-coins, and ultimately achieve a perfect life. The author argues that extracting just the F-coin element ignores the full picture. F-coins are likened to a doctor's thermometer, a really helpful reference tool to check a patient's status, sure, but definitely not the ultimate deciding factor of whether the soul is perfectly healthy.
Which takes us to Section 5, Rebutting Fraud Claims.
Now the defense tackles the heaviest legal charge head-on, fraud, and specifically the accusation of luring believers into making financial contributions. The prosecution claims the organization operates as a scam, using deceptive tactics, but the author dismantles this by looking at the actual legal definition of luring. Legally, fraud requires the use of fake information and coercion to make someone act against their true will. The defense claims both of these elements are entirely absent here because all community information is totally public, participation is strictly autonomous, and there are absolutely no individual profits.
The author breaks this down step by step. Step 1. Fraud requires hiding the truth. Yet, all Lifechanyuan texts and rules have been publicly available online for literally decades. Step 2. Fraud requires victims. Members are independent thinkers, referred to internally as grass, and they're free to leave at any time without any barriers. Step 3. Fraud requires illicit profit. The community's funds are managed collectively, they're not controlled by the guide. So without concealed facts, trapped victims, or a profiting mastermind, the author argues the legal framework for a fraud conviction just rapidly collapses.
Finally, Section 6, Philosophy versus Secular Law.
The author's core thesis is captured powerfully right here. This degradation is essentially a presumption of guilt, using secular criminal law to judge spiritual philosophy. They argue that the prosecution has taken abstract, ancient philosophical concepts, like the ascetic ideal of letting go of earthly possessions, which is found in many world religions, by the way, and unfairly downgraded them into crude, secular commercial transactions just to secure conviction.
To anchor this philosophical defense in hard, indisputable facts, the author highlights a critical number: 0. Yep, that is the exact number of private bank accounts possessed by the guide. The defense argues that you just cannot have a financial scam if there is absolutely no individual financial beneficiary hoarding the alleged profits.
And that 0? Well, it's backed up by another staggering number: 500. Across 500 individual government inspections, audits, and unannounced raids over the years, authorities found absolutely no evidence of economic crimes, illicit wealth hoarding, or financial misappropriation by the guide.
So as we conclude this explainer, we want to leave you with the author's final provocative thought. If a group of people is fully informed, acting entirely voluntarily, and collectively managing their own assets without a single profiting mastermind, how should the law treat them? When secular criminal law is used to prosecute deeply held, voluntary philosophical lifestyles, is that a victory for justice, for sure, or is it a dangerous legal overreach into the realm of human belief? Thank you for joining us as we unpacked the anatomy of this legal defense.